Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Conjola Connected Communities Masterplan and Yooralla Bay Concept Plan webinar. I wish to advise you that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Get Involved page and therefore can be reviewed by you at a time that is suitable and also accessible to any others who are interested and were unable to attend. My name is Jane Lewis and I'm the Interim Director of City Lifestyles at Shoalhaven City Council. I would firstly like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today within all parts of the Shoalhaven and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people here with us today online. I would also like to acknowledge the significant impact the recent bushfires and floods have had on the Indigenous community, their well-being, culture and history within the Shoalhaven. 2020 has been an extremely difficult year for the Shoalhaven, and one of our significantly affected communities is that of Conjola Park and Lake Conjola. New Year's Eve and the following days brought indescribable and horrific anguish when the Currawong bushfire had made its way to the coastal town. This was followed by the impact of several floods since and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen an incredible amount of resilience and perseverance from our community members, and we are here today to talk about one project that has emerged from a dedicated community group, being the Conjola Community Recovery Association. In March of this year, the Recovery Association sought the expertise of TACT Studio for Architecture to develop a master plan for the area to rebuild and enhance aspects of the open space and be a key part of the community's recovery and healing process. The CCRA subsequently engaged TACT Studio for Architecture, who along with council staff and with other community representatives have coordinated this process. Today we have Brent and Dunn and Katarina Hendel from TACT Studio for Architecture, who will be running through a presentation of the draft Conjola Connected Communities Master Plan and the draft Yooralla Bay Concept Plan. I also have council staff with us, Susan Edwards, the Community and Recreation Manager, and Jessica Volkanovsky, our Senior Strategic Planner. We have allowed time for a Q&A and invite any questions via the web chat. Any questions we do not get to answer today will be put up as frequently asked questions on the Get Involved website, along with all questions received and the recording of today's meeting. I will now hand over to Brent and Katarina.
Thank you, Jane. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this webinar. I think I might start with just quickly introducing ourselves in the sense of how we got to be involved in this project. Brent and I, we actually founded our practice down in Conjola 10 years ago. And so we've got family, as many people know, and so we, after the fires, we were there around Christmas, and then we were further on the south coast, and after the fires we came back to help out at the recovery centre. And while being there, we've spoken to many people, particularly the members of the recovery committee, and a lot of questions came up and a lot of things that the community wished they had, and also how they wished the place to be rebuilt. So it was basically a loose assortment of a wish list of things. Wouldn't that be great if out of this disaster something positive could come? And so then we actually, if you go to the next slide, put together a, could you do that please? Could you go to the, yeah, that's it. So we put together an initial master plan, which the idea was really to collate a number of those ideas that were floating around about what Conjola could be and could become in this rebuilding process, and to collate that into a single document that then allowed people to comment on and to give input and to collate ideas. So this is really about ideas. It's not about an actual plan as such, which is why it's quite loose. And on this plan, there was a number of components that had come up in our conversations with both the committee and some members of the community, and that was this sort of long-standing, actually, desire for connection between Conjola Park and Lake Conjola, including a bike path, possibly, is what we discussed, or a shared cycleway, however you want to call that. And then some other key components were some shelters or meeting points, possibly community building, a memorial playground, new playground equipment, skate park. So it became the sort of larger picture, big picture image of what the community might be in another 5-10 years from now. And we believe that it makes sense to bring that all together. So because otherwise, once there's something on paper, we're all able to talk about it and comment on it. Before that, it is very hard to pin down, and it's very hard to get opinions. And so that was this initial document that we just put together in order to help people to sort of have some input into the process of what might happen into the future. Because it's quite a complex process, obviously. In that sort of first phase after the fires, we also ran a rebuilding workshop at the recovery centre. And I think that was also one of the key points where we sort of got a little bit more insight into what may be needed. And after that, then the Recovery Association raised some funds specifically for us to be engaged, to then be paid a small sum to put together a more detailed master plan, which then could be used to actually take to stakeholders, to take to investors, to take to private companies, and to, so next slide please, sorry, to then look at donations, look at council's view on things, and basically get a little bit more detail into this. So if you could change slides, please. I think it takes a little while. So that plan, which, you know, it looks simple, but it was actually quite a long consultation process. It's trying to put together a big picture that has a little bit more detail, determine some location of possible facilities. This is obviously not, it's a suggestion, it's by no means what's going to happen, but it's trying to collate sort of a plan for the cycleway in particular and its possible route, and locate some facilities that might be happening in this rebuilding process, which then enabled the recovery centre to seek donations for some of those components. And so it outlines a number of things. It locates the cycleway, as I said. It notes some possibilities of path of exploring the national park areas and the council-owned reserve areas. It shows some of the facilities at Lake Conjola, and then importantly at Conjola Park, where most of the devastation obviously has happened. And it makes there's some destinations, basically is what we called it, and it shows where they are, and the coloured areas, they basically just give an overview on the ownership of the lots of land, because the hardest thing in navigating this whole proposal of the cycle path in particular is obviously the fact that it goes across community land, crown land, council-owned land, and private property. And that's what this plan tries to clarify, so that we can start to talk about ideas. Next slide, please. And as part of this sort of, as a further development of this initial plan, we've then put together the components of the project. At this point, they weren't ordered by greatest importance or anything. They're just parts of a big picture puzzle. To briefly take you through, the main driver behind this in the beginning has been that shared pathway, so that we can make sure that Conjola Park and Lake Conjola become a more connected community, which, you know, is particularly important during emergencies, but also in terms of how residents move between the two communities, how services are accessed. I think that connection is something that should be looked at. So there's the pathway, and those images are just other projects and suggestions of what the capacity of this could be. One thing that came up pretty early was some sort of community facility at Conjola Park, and this will be the second part of this presentation that we're going to be talking about. And that basically came from the sense that particularly after the fires, that there wasn't really a gathering point, a meeting point to exchange information. There was nowhere to store, share facilities and things. For example, donated generators. There was no storage, and so some sort of community building facility at Conjola Park was one of the first ideas that sort of appeared out of this. Then there's the memorial, a shelter possibly at Conjola Beach for the similar purpose, playground as the playground had burned down, skate park because that's something that had been discussed for a while. The thought of maybe opening some of the other areas of Conjola National Park for mountain biking, not in a big scale, but for children of the communities to actually just have some tracks to run through there, which is something that's sort of already happening, but possibly a more formal way. Fishing platforms and some signage at the entry to Conjola and some new road alignments and linkages. So that's all things we looked at in the process and that are located in that final master plan. So next slide, please. And then once we discussed all of those things, council got involved at some point, because obviously all of those projects need to be approved by council and they need to be approved by a number of different departments because of the complexity of the fact that we're dealing with waterways and RMS having some input and so on, and environmental issues. And so what we then did as the next step is to put together a set of, we call them modules, so groups of projects that could be completed one by one, because obviously this is a big picture vision over many years potentially, and not all of this is going to happen at once. And so we've sort of looked at how they can be most logically grouped together. And so it shows different sections of the cycleway, but it shows some, for example, module C is Yooralla Bay area, and that includes the cycleway connecting to the new boat ramp, for example. And module B, if you see that, the red one at the front at Yooralla Bay is the community building and the other facilities at Conjola Park. And so this also then helped to define where to start, because that's always the big question. And there seemed to be consensus that the area that needed most assistance, quite obviously, was Conjola Park. And so module B is the one that everyone decided that needed to be progressed further. And so then we were engaged separately to that to come up with a concept plan for module B, the Conjola Park area. So if you go to the next slide, please. The other thing, just to add that, I think because we know this is a long-term project and there's going to be many parties involved, and there might be other architects, other planners, other entities involved, we've tried to put together a set of design principles that then could guide other further projects, and they have to do with community well-being, natural beauty, environment, resilience, economic development, and beauty and delight. And I think they are things that we feel are important to assess against each project, each rebuilding project that of a public character that happens in the community. So this is just asking a number of questions, and I think any project that's being attempted in the area should answer positively to those, so that we can make sure that anything that's being built now is not just being rebuilt or built, but built better. Next, please. So I think the next part we might speak about the specifics of the master plan for Yooralla Bay. I might get Brent to talk about that.
Yeah, so essentially what Katarina's been sort of referring to is the fact that the first part of the process was collating all the information about what potentially could this community build back better, and how could we build it back better. And so in the focus, obviously due to the devastation, was in Yooralla Bay in this part of Conjola Lake. This is kind of a drilling down into a bit more detail about a specific area, and we imagine that a similar process might happen for each of the other areas of the lake, and then that allows the community in these kind of forums to then have further say into it. So the beginning of this process is to have a look at the site analysis, which is something that we also talked a lot about in our rebuilding workshop for the individual houses. But all of this work is focused squarely on understanding what the potential is for the community to build back better. So we looked here at where the existing, where the views were coming from, where the sunlight was coming from, where the water was moving across the site, and we'll go on to, and we've mapped that onto these site plans with the water supplies and services. So if you move on to the next slide, please. This gets overlaid, this information, and so we start to get a picture of, where are the opportunities and where are the constraints. So, for example, down in the park, there's an area that does, it stays quite muddy after flood and quite wet, and there's a bit of drainage that needs to be done. So the idea being that if we can identify the problems in an area, the possibilities in an area, whatever we do can address the problems and take advantage of the opportunities. So next slide, please. So these are the components of the concept plan, and again, all these concept ideas are here for everybody's comment. And so the first part, if we start perhaps at 1, that's the shared bikeway. That's an idea that this continual link goes from the around the waterfront, around a natural the natural walking path that's already there, linking the new boat ramp and this new facility. So it's easy to move around for young families. It's a defined pathway which then keeps the rest of the sensitive environment sort of looked after. Then number 2 is this community building. Now the community building should perhaps be, I guess, seen in it's a shelter. We'll talk about what it's got in a minute. It's basically a barbecue area with some facilities, and then some kind of reflection seat within, maybe that's integrated within the community building. There's a pontoon fishing point, an upgrade to the existing one, a memorial garden, number 5, that's been already started work on by the community, we understand. The other components are a basketball half-quarter playground, which has now been completed already by the council, a bike play area, adventure play, kayak jetty maybe, and a larger scale memorial, which we'll talk about in a minute. So next slide, please. That's the general components that and all of those came from hearing people who were involved in the area. They came from us walking around, seeing some of the events after the gatherings after the bushfires. They came from us walking the site and listening to feedback from the community consultation, particularly with Mr. Allen in that area in the beginning. So then the core of this proposal here is this community building. The idea of this is that every community needs a place to come together, whether it's in good times or bad times, and to be able to accommodate that, we're proposing essentially a sheltering roof with a couple of platforms and some amenities, some toilets, a storeroom for community facilities, and then potentially another room that could be used as a kiosk for whatever else it needs to be used for, whether it's emergency situations or whether it's just gathering and giving out information.
And that's come to a degree also from the fact that after the fires, we could see how valuable the community building at Lake Conjola was in coordinating the efforts to help people and to store donations and so on. But obviously that was at Lake Conjola, whereas Conjola Park really could have done with a base, if you want, to manage that sort of process and to store a few things and have some generators ready for people. So that's the intention of this much smaller scale community building, that in an emergency situation could be used for this. It will allow the community to have some facilities for for storage particularly, but also to, it's a really small scale kitchen that was sort of a kitchenette basically that we thought might be incredibly helpful in the aftermath of anything happening, but also more importantly in looking into the future, hoping that this won't ever happen again. Something that could be used for a kid's birthday party, something as simple as that. And it's actually fairly small scale, but I think what's also important to say is that this is really a collation from a number of comments that sort of, or in briefing that's been given to us, but that this is just a concept. It can change, it will change, those things always do. And this is what this webinar is for, to get feedback on what scale that is actually desired by the community. We simply looked at the scale in the sense of, could we accommodate 2 kids' birthday parties with 2 families there? That's sort of the scale, if you imagine. And it's existing, it sort of tucks on to the existing jetty where it is now, so that can be upgraded and used for fishing, but also for better access during emergencies.
And so, look, it should be really said that there's been a fair bit of thought given to its location here. And this photograph on the left here is this gorgeous view right down the barrel of the lake, which is something extraordinary in this area. And the idea being that once you're inside this building, that's what you can enjoy. It's not about the building per se, but about providing sheltered spaces in what is currently quite an exposed edge of the lake that has no vegetation on it. It needs a bit of rehabilitation anyway, so it made sense at that location we could actually lift the levels up a little bit. You know, we've still got a bit of there's quite a lot of work to be done on getting the exact level for the flooding and things, but it gives us a good basis to begin. It's a east-facing location. It enjoys the lake. It's a place that you know, would be perfect for a barbecue.
And in addition to that, it's really the only location that gives decent access for boats, because the rest of the bay is probably too shallow for that. And it also sits below the fairly steep hill behind it, so that there's no issue with impact on any views from any residential buildings. And I think that was really important to us as well. Next, please.
Yeah, so this just shows the section of the building. So I cut through the building in that hill, showing that it's intended that it sits below the view over the top there, that it has a zone at the back of it where the path can go past. The council's asked that to be a bit wider so that we can get maintenance vehicles in from council to come and clean up in there if needed. And then in the front is the view out to the lake, and that steps down at the bottom there to the so you can enjoy the edge of the lake. Yeah, I mean, you can read across the. And
the exact levels, they will be determined in the continuing process, because this is obviously a sketch only. So once there's more survey detail and more flood investigation, then those levels can be firmed up to ensure that particularly the enclosed areas, the storage areas, are above any flood levels.
Yeah. So then the next one, please. So this is an idea of how it might find itself being used. There's a couple of picnic tables on each side. The building opens on the north side so that it gets winter sun. That is the exact winter sun angle coming in there, shown sketched, and so there can be winter sun coming through the centre. And so there is two sides with 2 tables that would then function as a place to meet for a community gathering, to meet. Somebody could sit there quietly in the sun in the mornings. In the afternoon, it's protected. The idea is that we actually build up a handrail at the front rather than having it directly open to that breeze coming across the lake. So you can sit behind that and get a little bit of shelter from the wind. But the idea is that it's quite clear all the way through. Its construction is ideally something robust, something fundamental, something that doesn't worry people that we're going to catch on fire again. It's got to be, yeah, robust, quite easy to maintain, but it's also got to age well and gracefully over time, like the rest of the lake. So the intention being that it activates a previously unused or unactivated area, revitalises the jetty, and then, you know, perhaps forms a place where people can enjoy a celebration of a life event or something like that.
And it obviously is all in relationship to the other parts of that little master plan for the area. The playground, it's got a visual relationship to the playground that's already built, and there is some funding available if the community desires to build the basketball court and the little bike play area. So that all comes together as something that makes a bit of a little town centre basically for Conjola Park. And that's something that Lake Conjola has enjoyed for a while. There's some facilities there, and you know, we think that Conjola Park, in terms of how many people do actually live there, really justifies some of their own facilities, particularly for families as well. Next one, please.
Yeah, so, and then the other component that we heard a lot about in various scales is the idea that there might be something to memorialise that kind of traumatic event, and the idea that there might be something that celebrates the lake is something, you know, I think it needs to be a memorialisation in a number of different scales, and I think it can the event was so it was such a large scale event that it does just, this is the ACT Bushfire Memorial, and it does allow people to touch base with that over time, and so the intention behind all of these is to simply look at if the community wanted to memorialise this event, if they wanted to you know, have something that they could see that there's a recovery process happening over time, that, you know, this would be a simple, the suggestion here is that we simply place a number of the burned logs out in a place in the lake that's out of the way, that could be seen from far away as an art object in itself. So the idea is that it could reflect, and it could take on all of those characters of the, you know, that something floated in the water beautifully does reflections and refractions, and that it also provides, you know, a bit of these kind of burned logs have always been a real symbol of recovery from the fires, and from those bark comes that regrowth, and in this case the idea is that we integrate regrowth of symbols of some of the indigenous dreaming, some of the stories of this place, and so we can use this opportunity as a way to help everybody learn more about the place, help everybody understand that the lake is the key to this, you know, the well-being here. We need to look after it. It's quite a densely layered, you know, memorial in a simple gesture. So that's something that we feel it could offer something of a, you know, but given that it's not necessarily, you know, if this is natural materials over time, in another 50 years, this could be gone. This could also have evolved and moved on, and no longer do we need to remember, because we may have learned from that and moved on. So,
well, there's many layers to this, and I think that's something that would require a lot more discussion with many people, and we've sort of reached out to both authorities, but also to some of the Indigenous groups in the area. But I think that's something that shouldn't and won't happen quickly, and that, you know, needs time to be thought about carefully. I think that concludes the presentation for now. Obviously, what we've taken you through just now is actually only a small part of the two documents that came out of the process, the bigger master plan, which also contains a large section of research into the history and into the natural environment, and then the Yooralla Bay concept plan as well. And you can, online, obviously, both documents are available in their entirety, and so I think they need to be looked at together. So
we do encourage a reading of them, and if there's any questions, the point of this is to put something down that the community can now respond to, and, you know, if some things have more importance than others, then it'll take on a life of its own.
And the idea of a concept is that really it is the first stroke of a pencil, to form a basis of discussion and to test possibilities, basically. To, you know, we can't obviously discuss the impact of something without having first drawn up an idea for it, so that we then can interrogate it. And that's the purpose of both of those documents. One more to guide the future process, and the other one to put an idea out there of what could be. That's it, I think. If we could change to Q&A now, maybe.
Thank you, Brent and Katerina. Please stay with us as we move into our question and answer part of today's webinar. And I'd also like to welcome Council staff members Susan Edwards and Jessica Volkanovski to join with us. Now, first up, I might throw this one over to Brent and Katerina. We've got some questions coming in already, which is terrific. Was the community building at Yooralla Bay inspired by another community building of a similar style and location? What was your inspiration there?
Look, it wasn't directly inspired by a particular building, but there are many great examples of buildings of similar scale that have been successfully built and integrated in the community. One that's come up and that we showed an image before in the initial master plan was a, I have to look it up, it's for Lake Macquarie Council. It's the Regatta Foreshore kiosk and amenities that was built there. And so I encourage everyone, if you're interested, just have a look at it. I think that's something that's architecturally lovely but modest. In this case, it's all timber, so I think there would be slightly different consideration being given to the fire proneness of the area. But I think as a sort of, in terms of scale and modesty, I think it's a good example to look at. And there is actually many others. But the idea overall for the actual community building has always been that it's something that is of a vernacular nature that sort of fits within the environment rather than something that goes as a big beacon. But it doesn't mean it can't be good architecture.
Thank you for that, Katerina. We've got one now which I might put over to the council staff. What are the next steps after consultation?
Okay, I can take that. Hi everyone, my name's Susan Edwards. I'm the Manager of Community and Recreation. So what we're going to do with the consultation is we're hoping that lots of people make comments on it, provide us some input. Then we will be collating all them and providing responses and then reporting them to council so that council then can make a decision on how we move this forward.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Susan. There's another question here, which is probably for council staff. What is the anticipated timing for implementing the plans?
Well, that's a lovely question. I love that one. Well, I guess it depends on how long it takes us to actually get plans that the community are happy with. So that would obviously be our first point. And then once we have those plans, we'd then be in a position to seek funding. So obviously it's reliant on us finding funding to implement them. But obviously we need to get to that point where we have plans that are endorsed by the community and council.
Thank you for that, Susan. This perhaps is one for all of you to perhaps answer. Have the impacts of the community building been assessed, and then what environmental studies will be done or will be needed?
I might start off with that. Look, I think, again, I think it's important to say that this is a concept plan and that the assessment of those impacts is part of the continuing process from here, because obviously an assessment can only happen once there's concrete plans, which at this point are only sketch plans. They don't locate it entirely. But obviously in designing the building, we have made sure that we've thought about all those things, and that's why the building, for example, has moved from an initial idea of it being further down, further south in the park area. It's moved up the top because we have undertaken some consultation with council, the environmental department, with RMS. We've all met on site and discussed the merits of different areas and scales there. And so that is the beginning of a longer process, I would say. And the fact is that in the process of then seeking council approval, there will be then more intensive consultation on those particular issues. I think where the building itself is located now, it is, it's out of any view corridors. It's as away from residential buildings as it can be possibly. We don't anticipate a great deal of noise from it in the first place. It's just a community shelter with some barbecues and some storage facilities. But obviously that can happen depending on the members of the community. And so we're open to any suggestions, and we're sort of looking forward to engaging with that more. I mean, the other part is obviously that there was quite a few parts to the puzzle in terms of the playground, which were already located, but then there's the basketball court and the skate park, well, in Lake Conjola, and the bike play area. They need to be assessed on the same terms, obviously, in the process, and things may be moving, or probably will be moving around as we go in response.
Thank you, Katerina. And council staff, is there something that you can add to what environmental studies or other studies might be required, please?
Yes, I can take that one, Jane. So as following on from what Katerina said, as part of the design process, after we get to a point of having an adopted master plan, we would obviously need to continue to a review of environmental factors stage. And some of the considerations there will be flora and fauna, bushfire, flood and Aboriginal cultural heritage, as well as some other items that might come up throughout the process. But we will certainly look at the various submissions that are provided through this process to see if there are other matters which may need to be reviewed and considered as part of the subsequent stages.
Thank you for that, Jessica. There have been a number of questions have come in about funding for the project and grants, so I might add what I can to that. At this stage, we are in the initial concepts and the consultation stage, and yes, I think there have been some observations that it's a grand plan and a huge concept. However, there are a range of grant funding available, particularly for areas that have been hit by the bushfires and more recently with COVID too. And the Conjola Community Recovery Association have also been fundraising, so we anticipate there will be some seed funding to get this project moving forward when the elements have been decided upon and the various studies have been done. However, I think Katerina identified that the plan is in a series of modules, so that does allow it to be worked through in stages dependent on what the community wants and what the community identifies as its priorities. Now, there was a question here that's come through in relation to a consultation with the Aboriginal community and asking what consultation has or will be undertaken, and will there be a recognition of Aboriginal culture through the project?
We might sort of say a few words. Look, I think that's a longer process actually, and we've reached out to the Land Council and to some other members of the Indigenous community locally. We've agreed that we would meet on site, but we haven't been able to actually make a date for that yet. I mean, COVID has made this not exactly easier, but our intention and the Recovery Association's intention is that that will be part of the process, and particularly, very important part. And we've done a fair bit of research ourselves in trying to understand the landscape and the connection to landscape in the area, and particularly the memorial. I think there's an intention that we may be able to get some Aboriginal artists if they're interested, directly involved in creating this. So the answer is basically yes, but that's something that's sensitive and it's not something that can be rushed. So hopefully in the process we'll be able to sort of share a little bit more about this as well.
Thank you for that, Katerina. A number of comments have come through asking were other locations considered for the barbecue community building, and I think you highlighted the beautiful view that is offered where the current location is, but in deciding that, were there any other spots around the lake in Conjola Park that you initially considered?
Yes, there were, Jane. We initially had thought that it might make sense to start the community building down near the playground on the flatter area. However, that it wasn't getting a lot of sun, and a lot of area for it meant that if we wanted to get any connection with the lake, there would need to be some kind of removal of the she oaks that were there. The preference was to avoid that, so then we also had a look at the flatter area, which, as it turns out, is a bit more marshy, a bit more flood prone around to the south a bit further. So we basically tested it, and this is with council staff, with Waterways, and with the Environment Officer, and discussed each of those options. And the fact is that the location that it is proposed in now, it is the area that does most need rehabilitation. So it gives us an opportunity to use the building to kind of think through some of those and resolve some of those issues.
And then other things that played into this location are the access to the lake, because we wanted this to be able to be used as a point of arriving and leaving, and because obviously during the fires the lake was an evacuation route, and although the building itself is a shelter, not an evacuation centre, it can be a meeting point that allows people to get onto boats and leave the area. So that was important. And the other thing is that it's now located below a fairly steep hill, which means there's far less impact visually on neighbouring houses. So that's also something that was important, because everywhere else in the park, houses are sort of at the same level. So there would have invariably some impact on views, and we're trying to avoid that obviously as well.
I think it's important too to say that the building and all of these facilities are designed to be accessible, so that there can be wheeled access throughout the things down to the lake edge as well now.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that explanation. It's great. We've got many questions coming in here, and I want to reassure people, if we don't get to your question, we will answer all of these and put them up on the FAQs. We've got a question here with regard to barbecues, about how many barbecues there may be, and are barbecues able to be used during the COVID restrictions? So our advice there is to check with the New South Wales Health side about the current advice. However, our park facilities are open and our barbecue facilities are able to be used. We obviously encourage you to observe the social distancing and make sure that the number of people that you have is within what the New South Wales Health guidelines are advising. So the good news is, yes, our barbecues in our parks are open. And with regard to the number of barbecues, perhaps I could ask Katerina or Brent just to identify what's in the proposed concept at this stage.
Look, do you want to go back to the plan maybe, so we can have a look at that just briefly in the slides. Look, obviously this on is sketch, so it's pretty loose, but there's 2 areas with 2 barbecues right now. If you go one further back, just plain thinking that it might be 2 different groups who could be using it at the same time. This
barbecue at each end.
So it's 1 barbecue at each end at number 6, if that helps, and then 2 tables sort of associate with each barbecue. Obviously that could be 1, it could be more, I'm not sure, but when we came to Conjola Park, and one of the sort of events to come together, which was sort of a barbecue, I think it was in March, there was actually quite a few people. So the scale is really relating to the families we saw come together there. Yeah, but this could change.
And I think the other thing to say about this in general is that this isn't intended as a public facility for the residents of Conjola Park. So, you know, its scale should be suitable so that it can be used by that. That's what the brief for this project is, to make sure that it's primarily serving a function and providing a function that doesn't exist currently in the area.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. We've had some comments come through on the bike and the cycleway with some alternate suggestions or options. So we will certainly consider those as part of the feedback we've got. This one suggests that it could run along the entrance road and provide some lookout options, and would connect Lake Conjola and Conjola Park. Could potentially be less intrusive to visitors, but could also connect to the Narrawalli Creek Reserve. So we'll certainly take on board those comments as we review the feedback that we've got. A number of comments have come through regarding will the barbecue areas be lit, and perhaps some concerns about noise or intrusion to some of the residents there. So again, they're all valid comments that we will take on board, and the things in connection with lighting and stuff comes around to detail further down the line when we've got to the position of deciding exactly what it is that the community wants there and how they would like to see those spaces used. Been a question here about have there been any ecological studies on the lake and the flooding which may impact on the building or any of the proposed developments. I might just pass that one over to council staff just to clarify some of the processes that we'll go through and some of the studies that will need to be undertaken.
Yeah, I'll take that if you want, Jess. Sorry, I was just about to jump in there. Yeah, so in relation to that, obviously we've done some preliminary work in relation to flooding. Council has that those flood mappings currently in our mapping system. So we have looked at it initially, but obviously until we actually determine what works are being proposed, it's a bit hard to do that more deeply, and that will be something that does continue as the plans are determined.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question?
And we can always provide further information through our FAQs. Another question here, who is it envisaged the main users of these facilities might be? Is it for the locals, seniors, young families, tourists or visitors?
I'd say yes. All of the above.
All of the above. And I certainly noted that Brent earlier said that everything will be designed to be inclusive, including all the access ways and any of the amenities that are ultimately agreed on by the community. So we will meet any of our DDA requirements there too.
Yeah.
Just bear with me as I some comments here about it would seem the perfect location for a party, and some concern about jet skiers who may be on the lake at night seeking to use this and destroying the peace and the tranquility. So again, all valid comments that we will take on board as part of this process. Some comments here about the memorial and just some concerns as to whether this is a good idea, and it would be interesting to get the community feedback on that as to whether it is a reminder of something that they would prefer not to frequently see, or whether it's a good place for reflection. So again, through the community consultation, we certainly appreciate your thoughts on that. Some comments here about how many residents were consulted at this initial stage. So I think it might be helpful just to clarify the consultation process that's to date and what we're doing now and where that moves forward. So perhaps Susan or Jessica might be able to elaborate on that further.
I can take that question, Jane.
Thank you, Jess.
So we opened community feedback, or the community consultation period, on the 3rd of August, and that continues to be open, and it will close this coming Monday on the 28th of September. So as part of that process of commencing that consultation period, we undertook a mail out to the landowners within the area of Conjola Park, as well as letters to specific community groups like the Conjola Community Association, as well as getting them to provide links to our council's Get Involved page, which is the main platform for consultation that we are using for this particular consultation period. So through the Get Involved page, we have been able to provide copies of both of the plans which TACT have prepared, and we have been able to hear about today. We have also been using social media to get the word out on this particular project as well. we've had quite a number of contacts from various community members, both within Conjola Park and Lake Conjola, as well as other people from other areas of Shoalhaven who frequent the area as well. So we do know that people are hearing about it, and they are definitely interested in providing their comments on the project. So we will continue to use the Get Involved page to receive feedback, as well as provide updates in the coming stages of this particular project as well.
Thank you, Jessica. Some more comments coming through, just concerns from the residents about the use of the reserve and an increase in waste, and will additional waste collections be planned, and how will the reserve be kept clean? I think they're all comments that we can take on board as part of the consultation, and yes, they're very important in terms of maintaining the appearance of the reserve and also the health of the lake. So thank you for those comments. Another comment coming here, a couple of these. Is there going to be a commercial interest in the proposed community building? I think there was mention possibly of a cafe or a canteen. Is that something that could be clarified?
Yeah. Look, what we've sort of proposed was simply something that came from some feedback, in that it was tricky to run some of the recovery work in just providing people with a cup of tea and a bottle of water, because there's no location. So a lot of the donations were handed out from under a gazebo on the road. So the small sort of kitchenette there is simply for the community use, and then so that, say, a kid's birthday party could have a place where the cakes could be put out and a pot of coffee be made. But if the community who would be running this, in what I imagine, depending on what community wants, they could then decide to also run, say, a fundraiser for something on a Saturday when the weather's nice, and there might be some tourists around at this end of the lake, to sell some cupcakes. It's really as small as that. The intention is not to run a commercial operation from there, but unless someone puts their hand up and says, we want that.
Yeah, in which case it would offer opportunities for local kids to learn how to pull a coffee. But it's really up to the community. It's
really more a little community kitchenette that can be used when needed for, or just say, you know, I presume that maybe particularly in this process of rebuilding, there might be some community events and meetings just to get people together to talk about how to deal with the repairs that are happening to some public facilities and so on. So it could just be the little coffee kitchen.
Thank you for clarifying that. I'm just having a scan through further questions that have come in. We've had some further questions here on consultation, and I think both Jessica and Susan have spoken about the consultation process that is currently taking place. Some comments here. Have the safety aspects of a memorial in the water being considered? Some concerns that it may be a potential hazard or an accident waiting to happen. So we'll certainly take that on board, but all of those types of factors would be considered when planning anything that maybe does or doesn't get built.
Yes, we on that one, we have been talking to Transport New South Wales about that exact issue, and so the idea is that we try and find a location which is not in the channels and not in the navigation course, because it would require lights and things as well. It's a bit more complex. Yeah. Thank
you for that. There's a question here about proposed deep water boat ramp. That probably doesn't form part of this project, but we will aim to get an answer to you about that one from the relevant staff. This looks like it's in relation to Haviland Street. A question here about would additional car parking be required? Is that one that maybe council staff might be able to respond to?
Yeah, I can respond to that one. Obviously, depending on what ends up being in the community, I mean, I guess we're talking specifically about the park here, not generally. Depending on what ends up being in there and the amount of take up of it, there may be potential that council need to look to provide parking, but a lot of it we're considering it to be for the locals. I mean, it's a local park. We're hoping the people will walk to their park or ride their bike to the park, and I guess that's also the plan behind having the connectivity with a pathway so that people from other areas can get there. But it's definitely something that we'll be considering as we move forward.
Thank you, Susan. Comment here, a great starting plan to go from. Where would the skate park mentioned be near, and when would that start? Is that one that Brent or Kathleen might be able to talk about the location of the skate park?
Yeah, look, because a skate park was something that sort of generally came up in the early discussions on the wish list for particularly the older kids in the area. At this point, we sort of located at Lake Conjola because there's already some facilities there with a playground and tennis courts in that area then at the community centre. Because from memory, some initial feedback was that that wasn't necessarily something that the Conjola Park residents would want there. And we're sort of concentrated in the master plan on facilities for younger kids, particularly except for the basketball court, which there's obviously each of those facilities, as beautiful as they are and as much as amenity they add to the community, there's always also impacts from it, and we're well aware of that. So where there's a playground, there's noise, but does that mean you don't build a playground? No, it means you consider where the playground is. And the same for, say, the basketball court. So, for example, there have been some offers of a special material to be used for a half court so that the ball noise would be quieter. So there's all considerations going into that. And so the skate park was initially envisaged at Lake Conjola because there's, particularly in summer, there's also a lot of older kids there that would have something to do then.
Thank you. I might move now to our last question because we're coming towards a close. With the memorial, would you consider speaking to some local sculptors that live in the community to make works? Is that an option?
Most definitely. In fact, that's what we would like to do. And as we said before, we're hoping to maybe be able to involve the Indigenous community in particular for this particular idea. But there's also the Memorial Garden already happening, and hopefully there can be some sculptures integrated in that as well. So I think generally for any of those projects, it would be lovely to be able to involve local businesses, artists, and so on in every step of the process.
Thank you, Katerina. That's good to hear. I will draw things to a close now, but I'd like to take an opportunity to thank you all for your attendance today.